Hi, everyone. I think we're going to get started. Hello. I think we're going to get started. So I'm super excited to welcome y'all to our Thai Talk, the first one of this new semester. We're super excited to have Ms. Kay Van Way Ms. Kay Van Way. And she is a distinguished personal injury and trial attorney. And she focuses on patient safety and advocacy, and she has over 30 years of experience, and she has been named a Texas super lawyer since 2003. And she, over her career, she's consistently has been dedicated to patient safety, including myriads of cases, including the doctor death cases, where she worked on the civil prosecution of Christopher Dunch here in Dallas. She's also a adjunct here at SMU, where she teaches a class on medical malpractice. And we're so excited to have her and hear a great perspective on healthcare and trial advocacy. Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you all for having me. As I was standing here looking around the room, I couldn't help but notice that we're surrounded by a bunch of old lawyers. And I'm not talking about myself. I'm looking around this room. And actually, I do include myself in that old lawyer category. I want to start off by telling you a story. Once upon a time, there was this doctor specialized in spine surgeries. This doctor particularly specialized in a type of spine surgery known as a 360-degree fusion. This was a 13-hour operation. It began with the patient prone, the back would be opened up, the spine would be operated on from the back, then they would flip the patient over, they would operate on the spine from the front, hence 360-degree fusion. At the time, this was one of the highest paying procedures in not only the field of spine surgery, but also in all surgical cases. So a physician who had the stamina and the wherewithal to perform 13-hour surgeries day in and day out was a commodity to a hospital, particularly a hospital who was struggling financially. One surgeon like that could take them from being in the red to being in the black. So along the way somewhere, this physician began to behave very strangely and began having all kinds of catastrophic surgical outcomes, to the point where the hospital administration said, well, we don't really want to poke the goose that's laying the golden egg, but it's come to the point where we really need to do something. So we're going to ask this spine surgeon to come in and give us some random urinalysis. These urine tests were unsupervised and the doctor was clean, but yet the carnage continued. And so eventually the hospital administration said, you know, we still have concerns, so we would like to come in for a hair test, so we can look a little more deeply at whether something's going on with you. And the physician said, sure thing, I'll be there tomorrow morning. And he showed up for his hair test with not a single hair anywhere on his body. And any hair that had been anywhere on his body was bleached. The joke in the hospital among some of the staff became, there's only one way to keep Dr. So-and-so out of the operating room, and that is to put a white line in front, if you know what I mean. Subsequently, it was found out that he was a horrific cocaine addict. So there's more to the story, but before I go any further, I want you all to tell me, who do you think I'm talking about? Anyone? That's what you might think. Well, this was a case that I had a decade before Christopher Dunch. So the reason I'm telling you this is when that case happened, there was no Instagram, there wasn't a thing called a podcast. The case got picked up by 2020. Some of y'all don't even know what that is, but like Dateline. And it ran one time, so anybody who saw that show was aware of it. As opposed to the Dutch cases, which became a true crime thing and had millions and millions and millions of podcast listeners throughout the world. So we had that 10 years prior. We had Dutch. Now here I am, 10 years older and 10 years still practicing. And there are still Dr. Dunches in the world. So before we get into the case, I want to tell you, telling the story of Dutch is not to scare people who need to go to the doctor, which who among us needs to go to the doctor sometimes, and who among us, as everybody we love or care about in our lives, have to go to doctors, right? So I don't want to create a thing where we're like, oh, doctors are horrible. And some of you all may even be related to doctors, right? I've had that in my law and medicine class, where I'm, ragging on some doctor in some case or something, and somebody raises their hand and says, well, that kind of hurts my feelings because my dad's a doctor, or, whatever, my mom's a doctor. But the case is important because the system that created Bruce Hinckley was the fire surgeon's name. That system was the same system that created and fostered Dr. Dunch. That system, nothing has changed. So I will also say, before I jump into my presentation, that there's practicing law, and there's trying cases, and there's representing clients, and then there's finding your fly. And I'm 66 years old. I never go anywhere that people don't say, well, why don't you just retire? Why don't you give up law or, get a camper or see all the national parks or something? And I'm like, well, because I have a purpose. I've been given a reason to continue to practice. So my hope for you is that somewhere along your career path, you find your why. And your why cannot be because you want to make a lot of money and you want to drive a Range Rover and have a home in there, right? That cannot sustain you over the long, hard, grueling work that our profession requires. Okay? So let's get started, shall we? All right. Oh man, I was hoping that my video would play. So my video will not play. Back in the day, there was a president, you all probably weren't born. His name was Ronald Reagan. And he had a wife named Nancy Reagan. And she started the war on drugs. How do we think that went for us, right? Say to Nancy Reagan, are we better off? Are we winning the war on drugs? But there was this ad when we were little kids, we'd see this ad on TV and it would scare us to death. And so what it is there's an egg that goes in the frying pan and it says, the egg, this is your brain. You crack it into the frying pan and it says, this is your brain on drugs. So kids do drugs, you're going to fry your brain. So this is your brain. This is Christopher Dunch in medical school, in his residency. This is your brain on drugs. Kids don't do drugs. You will fry your brain. So who was Christopher Dunch? He was a lifelong recreational drug user. How did we know this? Because throughout the course of the litigation, we turned over every rock and then some. And we found people who would tell us under oath that he was a lifelong recreational drug user. He was also brilliant. So he was able to, despite his recreational drug use, he was able to go to medical school, get a residency in minimally invasive spine surgery. During his residency, there was a nurse who came forward and gave deposition testimony. And she said, yeah, he was doing his residency at the Children's Hospital, the neurosurgery residency on children, mind you, at the Children's Hospital in Memphis. And we had been up all night long partying and doing football. Well, that's one thing, she says. But it really affected me when after we had been up all night, he put on his lab coat to go see children. That was a bridge too far for me. So she reported him. The administrator calls him into the office and says, I'm going to need you to take a drug test right now. And he said, absolutely. I'll be right back. I have a patient in the ICU. But as soon as I go see that patient, I'll be right back down here and I'll take the drug test. And he disappeared for 3 days. So that was considered a refusal to take a drug test. And so he was sent to rehab. But just so you know, having a drug addiction during a spine surgery residency is not a deal killer, right? So he returns and he finishes his residency. I will also say that as a patient, if you went to have, or a loved one went to have a surgery on your brain or your spine, you would not be able to find out with a subpoena or any other way if your surgeon had a drug problem or had been to drug treatment. But something that made him, what I will say bulletproof, is that he had invented a stem cell technology. And the director of his residency program, also a neurosurgeon, was an owner of and on the board of directors for the technology company that owned or purchased Dunge's stem cell technology. So fast forward, when we're in the litigation, Dunge is in bankruptcy. The biotech company, actually, I dig into the briefs or whatever, and they basically said, anything that makes Dunge look bad hurts us because we are tying our future billions of dollars of fortunes to Dunge. We can't have the inventor of our technology be an avowed drug addict. Okay, so when he came back from rehab, we believe, of course, anyone that worked their salt, the director of the program that I'm talking about here is lawyered up and has threatened to sue anyone, including lawyers who say anything bad about him. Not that I haven't been sued for defamation before, for saying bad things about doctors. I'm not ashamed of it. Because truth is an absolute defense, but they do, when you say bad things about it, they're frustrated. They do have a tendency to want to sue you. But anyway, so he stayed in the lab most. In order to, even without a drug addiction, in order to be competent to perform complex spine surgeries on patients, you have to, that's what a residency is about. You have to be in the operating room doing surgeries, hundreds. Any neurosurgeon will tell you would take hundreds of operations to be mildly competent. But he stayed in the lab, didn't do the surgeries. So despite all of that, he was able to graduate and receive numerous letters of recommendation, accolades, including he was one of the best and brightest neurosurgeons I have ever trained. So, armed with a medical degree and having completed a neurosurgery residency, he's recruited by a medical practice here, and he gets privileges at Baylor Plano. You know, I've joked, which, you know, we joke not because things are funny, but because, you know, we have to sometimes laugh or else we'd be something all day long. So my joke was the only reason Dunch didn't hurt or kill more people is because he was so new to his practice, he didn't have very many patients. And I am really serious about that. He operated on 20 patients at Baylor Plano, and 16 out of the 20 were injured. At Baylor Plano, he operated on his lifelong friend, maybe his drug dealer, who knows. But that gentleman woke up quadriplegic. And while he was in ICU, paralyzed, unable to move any of his extremities, he said, I got to come clean. Dunch is a cocaine addict, and he was up taking cocaine all night last night before he operated. And so this launched an investigation, whatever. The investigation is concluded and Dunch is allowed to come back and operate on another patient, not with, hey, we're a little nervous about you. You're a brand new doctor. We would like to have another senior neurosurgeon in there with you or whatever. It's just like, here's your ticket. Let's get to operating again. So he operates on a woman named Kelly Martin. And this was a very straightforward, you know, what they would say in golf would be just a little chip shot up on the green kind of surgery. And he killed her. One of the experts that we had in the cases looked over this case and he said it was a clean kill. It's a clean kill. And so Baylor said, I tell you what, you're a young doctor. We don't want to cause any trouble for you. Let's have you resign in good standing. We'll send you a letter of recommendation and off you go. Hopefully these were just a few really bad outcomes and good luck to you. So this was kind of the rock that began rolling downhill because Baylor Plano is widely considered to be a good hospital system, a good hospital. Then he gets to Dallas Medical Center, which has had a long, rocky course over the years. It's kind of always been known as it's not a very good hospital, not one of the top hospitals in Dallas, certainly. So here, this brilliant neurosurgery ends up at Dallas Medical Center. And there's a thing called a credentialing process where they're supposed to go through and do a very, very deep, exhaustive study on the doctor before they allow it to operate. So Dallas Medical Center was struggling financially. Anybody kind of see like what we should what we were talking about. And here comes Dunch with his lawyer and his marketing agent showing up to say, Dallas Medical Center, I got cases ready to go. I can be in the OR. You tell me when. So they said, when? When can you be here? And so they granted him temporary privileges to come on over. He performed 3 surgeries there over the course of 2 days. 3 out of 3 people were injured. The first patient got operated on and released. Because sometimes with back surgery, you don't know until later that the wrong level was operated on or that something was done incorrectly. The second patient was Joella Brown, and he nicked her vertebral artery, and she was in the ICU dying. While she was in the ICU dying, Dunch began behaving like a madman. And he was saying, I gotta open her cranium. I gotta get in there and relieve the intracranial pressure, you know, set me up in the OR for a brain surgery, whatever. And they're like, whoa, hold on. you know, we're Dallas Medical Center over here at LBJ and Josie's. We don't perform brain surgery here. We don't have the facilities. We don't have the team. You're not credentialed to do brain surgery. By the way, yes, do you do any brain surgeries ever in your residency or whatnot? So he's just demanding that. But nevertheless, there was another case coming up. So that was my first client, Mary Ebert. Mary Ebert was an older lady. This was an elective surgery. You all know when you need back surgery, these aren't emergency things. So Luella Brown is dying. They don't know Dunch from Adam. This is his second day on the job. She's dying. He's behaving like a madman. Next. So Mary Ebert is rolled into the OR, of course, not knowing anything that's going on. Dutch was so disoriented during her surgery that instead of placing the spinal hardware that's meant to go into bones and hold bones together, he did the entire operation in musculature outside of the bony cage of the spine. Now, everyone in that operating room knew it, because I don't care if you're the lowest man or woman on the totem pole and you're a radiology tech, you're looking at that and going like, this is not only wrong, this is way wrong. During the surgery, the medical director of the hospital and the administrator are coming in to the OR while he's operating on Ebert saying, what are you going to do about Luella Brown, who is dying upstairs? And she did eventually go on to die needlessly. So we found out much later, according to one witness, that at the end of Mary Ebert's surgery, you know how football players, when they score a touchdown, they go, score. Dutch finishes up the surgery and goes, yeah. So, Dallas Medical Center says, we've had enough. Mary Ebert woke up with such agonizing pain. He had actually amputated nerve roots. And the surgeon who came in to care for her later said, when he opened her up, he said, it looked like a bomb had gone off in there. And it was so bad that he said, I think we have an imposter here, because whoever this person is not a surgeon, much less a neurosurgeon. We've got somebody in here posing as a surgeon. And so he jumped into action and began investigating it. So he got a picture of Dutch and sent it to the director of the residency program. And he's like, hey, this guy says he did a residency with you, but there's no way, right? And the director of the residency program, remember the owner of the bio, all that stuff. He said, oh no, yeah, great guy, great surgeon, whatever. So this is where my involvement began. So one of the things that I like to do as an older person is preach to people. My sons would say, oh my gosh, everything is a learning opportunity, mommy. But, I have always said, you can be a fierce advocate, you can be an aggressive litigator, but you don't have to be a jackass. And being a good person, an honest person, a hardworking person will pay off in dividends. And you will win the cases that you are supposed to win, and you'll lose the cases that you're supposed to lose, but you'll have your honor intact. I've always said, I practiced law before we had Rule 11 agreements. Y'all know what a Rule 11 agreement is? Because there was they called it Rambo litigation, because lawyers were so horrible to each other. Lie, cheat, steal, there was no honor among lawyers. That the Texas Rules of Civil Procedure now contains something called Rule 11 of the TRCP, which means lawyers are such scoundrels that you can't trust that if they shake hands on something, it's no good. It's got to be reduced to writing, signed by both lawyers and filed with the court. What I say I'm going to have written on my gravestone is she didn't require Rule 11 agreement. If she gave you her word was her bond, you could take that to the bank. So don't ever require, I mean, get your Rule 11 agreements because it would be malpractice if you didn't, but don't ever be the lawyer where they're like, I better pick that up with her, you know? So the reason I tell you that as a side is that the entire reason I got involved is that the surgeon who came in to fix Mary Eford and began this investigation had worked with me as an expert witness on a case. Interestingly, that case involved another technology. See how I'm working that there? That involved a technology where there was a brand new invention. In this invention, you could send your MRI in via the mail, whatever. And you would, this business would be able to tell you whether you qualify for their surgery. Well, you heard the old things, if what you've got is a hammer, then everything looks like a nail. You know, I don't think anybody ever applied and wasn't qualified for this new procedure. Well, the inventor of this procedure, as we found out, there's a thing called an IRB, and that's how things get approved in medicine sometimes. The IRB for this never was completed because the inventor of that, guess what? Okay, never finished it. So Dr. Henderson and I became acquainted on that case. The other funny thing about that case, and this is the other thing old people do, is they have to tell stories. The other funny, not funny thing about that case is that on their website, they were like the eminent doctor so-and-so and so-and-so, and he's on the video on this thing for patients to see where he's explaining this procedure. I gotta know who this doctor so-and-so is. Well, his doctorate was from a Bible college in Arkansas. So he was a doctor, but he had a PhD minister. So this was a business opportunity for people to be lured in. Send us your MRI and we'll give you a 20, even if you're not qualified, we'll send you a $25 Walmart gift certificate. So no harm, just come on and apply. So anyway, that's how I became involved. Fast forward, Dr. Henderson calls me and he says, I have never in my life ever handed a patient a business card, but I have handed your business card to Mary Eford. You can expect her to call you. So what I thought I had was a single, what we call a single event catastrophic case. We knew that Dunch still had a license to practice. So one of the first things that I did is I called up Brett Schiff, who was an investigator, a long-time investigative reporter for the FAA. And I'm like, you know, I think we need to get the word out in case there are other hospitals out here who might not know what happened at Baylor and DMC, and in case there might be any unsuspecting patients out here who would stumble in to this guy. He's like, I'm on it. So we do the story. That's the end of it, right? So this is July. Working on the case throughout the summer. Then in the fall, I began getting calls again. And I'm like, what do you mean? Where? How? How did this happen? So he ends up getting procedures at 2 more facilities. One is a place you would go, a place I would go. It's in Legacy, you know, the Legacy area up there in Plano. Beautiful facility, outpatient surgery facility. He's operating there. And then he's operating at a place called University General. Well, University General is not connected or affiliated with any university, by the way. You can go open a hospital and call it university, you know, whatever. University General was purchased, University General was, used to be Southampton Community Hospital. And it was an old rundown, dilapidated hospital, in South Dallas that was bankrupt. So a bunch of Houston investors, physicians came in and said, that's a business opportunity. We're going to buy this hospital out of bankruptcy. We're slapping the name on it, University General, and away we go. So at Legacy Surgery Center, 12 of the 15 patients he operated on there were injured. The only reason it wasn't 15 out of 15 is 3 of those procedures were removing spinal cord stimulators, which is, I would be impossible to personally, I think, just going in there and opening it up and gently removing the device. At University General, 9 that we know of, 9 of the 10 people were injured there. So when we found out, and there were, I have to give credit to the other lawyers that were involved. There was a wonderful lawyer by the name of Rob Crane who had 2 of the cases at Baylor Plano, which preceded mine. And he was wonderful to work with. And there were a lawyer here that would have, you know, a case here and a case there. I ended up with most of the cases, the vast majority of them. So during this period of time, Rob and I are literally getting on the phone and calling people. Saying, I personally called to University General and I said, I know this is an unusual call, but my name is Kay Van Way. I'm a medical malpractice attorney. I need to speak to your hospital administrator. What's it about? What do you want? I need to tell you, you got a mass murderer on your staff and you got to stop him. Oh, okay. Well, I'll tell you what, we'll put you in touch with our attorney. So they put me in touch with their attorney and I tell him the deal. Well, turns out he was their collections attorney. He was the one that was hired to go work on collecting medical bills from poor people who needed medical care. That's a whole nother topic. But, you know, that was the priority. So I'm talking to the bill collecting attorney. I'm telling him everything. And he writes me a letter. And I really should frame this and hang it in my office. It's just like, you know, I love lawyers, but sometimes you just want to go like, come on. He sent me this long letter, like, you better not, you know, you better not say another bad word about our hospital and we're going to sue the pants off of you or whatever. So that went nowhere. We also began calling the Texas Medical Board saying, you guys have got a huge problem. This physician is a serial killer. If he steps in the operating room, the data, right? The data shows that there is an overwhelming likelihood that he will maim or kill the patient. The primary owner of University General was a Houston physician. He said, you know, these personal injury lawyers, they're all alike. They're hysterical. They always make too much of a deal out of everything. Let's just go on business as usual. So a couple of my clients, JC, underwent a very simple cervical neck procedure. They go in anteriorly. Dutch was so disoriented during that procedure that a subsequent expert that I hired, Dr. Martin Lazar, whom I love and adore, he said, you know, he said, did you play Pac-Man when you were a kid? I'm like, yeah, I remember Pac-Man. Do y'all remember Pac-Man? So he said, there's this simple instrument called a Harrison Rongeur. And the Harrison Rongeur is used to take little nips of bone out. If you've got like a bone spur or something, we need to widen the spinal canal so spinal cord could flow freely through there or whatever. He said, as best I can figure, he was using the kerosene rongeur and just taking bites out of the spinal cord. So JC, paraplegic, horrific, wonderful, wonderful man in his life. The last surgery, this was also my client, the last surgery he ever did was JG. During JG surgery, he's coming in again from an anterior approach, and he was so disoriented. He was intending to remove the disc in the spine, but he's digging away, getting the disc out, but it was actually JG's esophagus. So he was reaming a hole in his esophagus. That's okay. If you accidentally make a giant hole in the patient's esophagus, just put a surgical sponge over it. Nobody will ever find out. Close the patient up. And that's exactly what happened. So that's a high-level summary of the Trail of Terror. So I'm going to fast forward through some of this because I really want to save time for y'all to ask questions. So one of the pleasures of my lifetime was receiving emails from Dr. Dutch late at night. One of them, and this was not one that I received. I'll tell you about this one, but this also, I don't know why I didn't bring this and put this in my office. It's just a beautiful thing. He started off, he's like, well, basically, you're just a complete hack. That was just like, you are so dumb. You don't have a clue what you're doing. I don't know how you got a law degree, lady, but but here's what I'm going to do. He said, this is a one-time offer, and you're very lucky to receive this offer, but I'm going to be willing to serve as your expert witness on these cases where I was the surgeon, and we're going to go after Baylor and we're going to make a lot of money. Well, I can't respond. It would be unethical for me to. I just sent it to his lawyer. But it also was very threatening to me personally. And it's not the first time in my career that I've kind of had to look over one shoulder. But thanks to Dr. Dunge, we have a really nice security system at our law office now. So we really had to get serious about that. And I took his threats very seriously. But this was to his girlfriend, that was his surgical assistant. And he says, anyone close to me thinks that I'm likely something between God, Einstein, and the Antichrist. So the question, this was called it's now famous Occam's razor email. You, my child, are the only one between me and the other side. I'm ready to leave the love and kindness and goodness and patience that I mix with everything else that I am and become a cold-blooded killer. So this became sort of the $64 question. Was Dutch grossly incompetent because he did not complete the required training that he needed to be competent? Was he addled by drugs and alcohol and or mental illness, or was he a cold-blooded killer? So we never went down the road of he's a cold-blooded killer, and I'll tell you why. You always, one of the temptations, you have to sometimes be able to resist temptation as a trial lawyer. Well, man, that would be sexy. You would say, he's a ladies and gentlemen of the jury, he's a cold-blooded killer. Guess what? That's an intentional act. Intentional acts are not covered by malpractice insurance. So I could have had my Perry Mason moment in court and armed my clients by avoiding insurance coverage. All right. So I've been asked that many times, and I really don't know if he was a cold-blooded killer or what. So then afterwards, after all of this, the tune of the physicians who knew him began to change. He has no clue what he's doing. He's a megalomaniac. He's chemically disturbed. He's pathological. These outcomes that he's having are unheard of. One physician at Baylor, the very first hospital, said, I had to put my hands over his hands during the surgery to keep him from killing the patient. One of the good things that came out of the case was that members of the medical community and the legal community came together. We shouldn't be, but we're kind of traditional enemies. But there were the grand total of 3 physicians. Out of all of those people, the one that put his hands over Dunch's hands, no, he's not coming forward to help. The people who were in the OR who saw him put the spinal hardware outside Mary Beaver's vertebra. No. And I'm not talking about sitting at your office waiting for your phone to ring. I'm talking about knocking on doors, taking depositions, swearing people under oath. Did you observe anything unusual during the surgery? No. Nothing. So, let me go through the criminal investigation. This also was a turning point in the law. That might be kind of an overstatement. But there was always kind of a traditional barrier between civil and criminal, because prosecutors, and I was one in the horse and buggy days, but prosecutors, they know how to prosecute cases where somebody committed an armed robbery or whatever. And they've traditionally kind of been hands off. We don't prosecute doctors for medical errors. But in this case, myself and 2 of the physicians went down to the DA's office and said, they would never believe me, but the physicians are saying, look, this is not a medical malpractice situation. This is a cold-blooded killer or whatever. So we found, I don't know how, but we found this young prosecutor by the name of Michelle Schubert. And she didn't know anything about spine surgery or anything. And she said, I'll do it. I will do it. And she did it. And she did an outstanding job. And she is the one that got the life sentence for Dutch, which is really, really unheard of. So I will say that in the criminal trial, Dutch had one expert witness on his behalf, and it was the director of neurosurgery at UT Southwestern. And he testified, he said, I'm not saying that he didn't do everything that you say he did. I'm not here to defend him on that. What I am here to say is it's the system. It's the system that created him. It's the system that allowed him to persist. So what about the system? And I'm going to give you a very high level overview on this. The system failed at every point in the way. There's something called the American College of Graduate Medical Education, ACGME. You can't just go up and say, I'm going to open K School of Neurosurgery, right? You have to be ACGME accredited, blah, blah, blah. At the time, there was no requirement that physicians who graduated from ACGME residencies and surgeons had proof that they didn't need a particular number of cases. Dr. Lazar only got him to change that. Despite all of us haranguing the ACGME, no one at the University of Tennessee has received any punishment. It's full steam ahead. Nothing ever happened to any of them. Hospitals are required to police their own. They are required to do thorough investigations and not let dangerous doctors on their staff. They're required by law all over, not just Texas, everywhere, to monitor the outcomes of their physicians, to see, hey, wait a second, why is this guy, the average blood loss is between 50 and 150 milliliters on most spine surgery cases. Why are his 500, 800, 1200, 2400? We got to look into this and figure out what's going on. And then they are required to report discipline to something called the National Practitioner Data Bank. The National Practitioner Data Bank is a super secret thing that other hospitals and medical boards, it's where they all talk so that they don't pass dangerous doctors from state to state, hospital to hospital. Since the inception of the NPD in 1985, more than 50% of all hospitals in the United States have never reported a single doctor one single time. So I hate to say this, but hospitals break the law. They know that if they have to report a doctor who's suspended for 30 days to the National Practitioner Data Bank, well, they've got lawyers too, and their lawyers are like, well, they didn't say anything about 29 days, and did they? All right. So doctor, you're suspended for 29 days, no. So the last thing that I'm going to say about this, because I really want to save some time for you guys, not much, I'm talking as fast as I can, I'm sorry, but there is a very unequal balance of power between patients and healthcare providers. In Texas, if a patient wanted to sue a hospital and say, I'm suing you because you had to vet this doctor, supervise this doctor, report this doctor to the data bank so that he didn't know harm other people, it's virtually impossible to do so because all of those activities that hospitals do, credentialing, peer review, are completely privileged, 100% privileged, not discoverable. Secondly, there's a malice standard in Texas. So here we go, hands tied behind the back because you can't get the evidence to prove your case. And by the way, prove that the hospital acted with malice. Okay, because negligence or gross negligence not quite good enough. Hospitals who take actions against physicians are protected. They are also immune from liability so long as they have a good faith basis for taking the action. So let's say a patient was able to overcome this extremely impossible standard. Their damages would be capped. Their non-economic damages in Texas would be capped at $250,000. Conversely, look at a neurosurgeon at the beginning of his career who would easily and handily be earning $1 million, $1.5 million a year, who brings a case against the hospital and says, you did not act in good faith. You destroyed my career, and I'm counting that, let's just call it 40, 50 million every day. So hospitals are making business decisions that are hurting patients. Since all of this happened, we call it, our little group is called No More Doctor Deaths. So the band is still together. Myself, Dr. Henderson, Dr. Lazar, Michelle Schubert, and a few others are still here. We meet once a month, and we're all going to go to our graves trying to change the system. Why? Because I'm a patient, and everybody I love and care about is a patient. Why should you care? Because all of you are patients, and everybody you love and care about is a patient. So I have ended exactly on time. I would stay if you want to ask questions, but if you need to go, I can understand. Sorry, I didn't leave more time.